Today we have a special guest, Dr. Kristal Lau, a doctor turned postpartum wellness consultant. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Daniel.
So let's start. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do day to day?
Absolutely. Well, to sum me up, I'm a bit of a nomad. And the main thing I'm doing now is focusing on entrepreneurship and growing my business here in France. So, as a postpartum wellness consultant, what I've done is taken all my medical background, and then through my journey after leaving medicine up to now, I also did a master's of public health and got a certificate of European lifestyle medicine. So I've been combining everything, including my personal background of living in multiple countries over the past 8 years, my Malaysian background, combining all of that into trying to redefine what postpartum means and defining the field of postpartum wellness, because that's not something that's well established today. It's kind of mostly a field dominated by businesses. So I'm really trying to bridge both worlds, clinical and non-clinical, east west, with moms, families, and with health professionals and businesses, and kind of bring everything together. And hopefully that'll inform, higher level, maybe guidelines or policies down the road, because that's kind of where my interest also lies, is in the policy aspect of health, because without that, I don't think we can effect much change.
Definitely. And that's a very interesting area, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts on these areas. Um, so let's start from the beginning. So, is it you grew up in Malaysia? What made you decide to study medicine? Where did you study medicine?
I love telling the story, although my mom will probably not be happy to hear it. I'm that stereotype child, that Asian child who was like, yes, you're going to do medicine. So that's kind of my foray into medicine, was through, yeah, just saying that, no, this is the career that would be best for you. So go for it. So I did that. And it was interesting because ever since I started med school in Malaysia, so I did a twinning program between Malaysia, and then that's how I ended up in Australia, because the university twinned with University of Queensland, and I've always been looking for a way out. Either through exploring different specialties within medicine to try to find something I really liked, or trying to figure out, well, what can I do with a medical degree if I choose to leave down the road. So that's kind of how I guess ended up in medicine, and then from Malaysia to Australia. Yeah. And then in Australia, I actually stumbled into geriatrics medicine, or rather, the elderly patients found me. I seem to gravitate to them, and I like to joke, I get along pretty well with the dementia patients. I don't know what that says about me, but it's always been quite a joy to treat and manage them, and their families as well. So I thought that was all right. I was going to do this. I was going to do geriatric medicine, perhaps a little bit of clinical education because I love to teach. And then I met my husband in Australia, and he was an active duty US service member, but who was stationed there. And yeah, and that was when I thought, if moving, we had to move because his job wasn't going to let him stay longer in Australia. And I thought, maybe this is the time to take that early jump out of medicine to figure out what I really wanted to do. So that's how then the rest of my global journey started.
Yeah, exciting. And so, you did medical school, part in Malaysia and then part in Brisbane. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then
Yes.
did you do like kind of internship or medical registrar? And then is it you pursued geriatrics as a specialty training or?
Yeah, so I did my internship in the Mater Hospital up in Townsville, and I decided to stay because at the time I realized Townsville Hospital, they offered the entire BPT, basic physician training pathway, if I wanted to do it there, and it seemed like a good opportunity, and I started to build a network there. So I stayed, and I actually rotated through so many specialties to find out. I even shadowed the pathologist when he was doing what do you call that, a autopsy, because I was like, hey, what's this job? Maybe I would like it to hide from everybody. Even shadowed the clinical admin people at the Townsville Hospital, and that's where I learned about clinical administration. And yeah, I figured if I stayed, then geriatric medicine would be the one for me that I wouldn't mind waking up to every day. Plus maybe clinical admin. So yeah, that's I actually did start my basic physician training probably a year and a half in. I was thinking of already about doing exams, preparing, starting to prepare for that before life kind of took me in another direction.
Yeah, awesome. And I think there are quite a few people out there that, maybe they enter medicine and go through medical school and then start working, and yeah, perhaps they feel it's not a complete fit for them, or yeah, maybe there were external pressures to pursue medicine. I know there's proliferation of groups. There's a Facebook group for doctors in Australia called Creative Careers in Medicine. I think
Yes.
more and more doctors are kind of branching out, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's startups, whether it's yeah, consulting for government or non-government organizations. So yeah, I think it's very exciting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I say we because in general, just people um, forget that we change as your life progresses. And, for those of us who want to start families or have just a life-changing event in any way, you suddenly become a caregiver to an adult family member who becomes really dependent on you. That changes so much that your priority, your personality, everything changes. And then the career, the passion, the desires also change. So I think it's important we allow space for that. And I really love that group, the Creative Careers in Medicine. That's kind of where I stumbled upon probably yourself, I think, and a bunch of other people that I've met till today who have actually helped me develop my trajectory in entrepreneurship. So I really love that group exists and that the people are encouraging clinicians to literally get more creative with your career.
Yeah. So I guess for you, it sounds like it was aspect of wanting to explore something outside of medicine, and maybe also life circumstance as well, with your partner. So tell us then about the journey in kind of leaving medicine. For a lot of people, that's like a taboo topic. And
Yeah.
how you kind of ended up in the field of postpartum consulting.
Absolutely. It was hard because I remember when I first left, I was very insecure. I was like, gosh, what I'm going to do in, America, because I did not want to participate in the healthcare system as a clinician, understanding that the way they practice medicine is very different from Australia. Um, but at the same time, yeah, I was insecure because I didn't know what to do. And I've always been brought up as oh, you got to be an independent woman and you have all these degrees and things. So you should be able to, you don't have to rely on your husband or your partner. So that was a hard transition. I mean, I'm glad that my husband, he never he never ever brought up like, oh, hey, you got to go get a job or anything like that. And thankfully, we were never at a position where we were financially insecure
Mm,
either. We were all right. We were living within our means, and that worked out for us. But the ego definitely took a huge hit. There's the guilt. And my mom would be like, so you're going back to medicine, right? All of that stuff. I actually took the USMLE step one because I felt like, oh my gosh, I need a backup plan. That was so difficult to study by myself in the middle of moving countries, doing the visa for the US, green card. And yeah, I mean, I managed to pass the first time, not a great score, I don't think, but probably enough to get into a residency if I wanted to, as a backup. But the good thing at that time was not stumbled, I had thought, maybe instead of trying to force myself to go back to clinical, what else is out there? So public health came up. So I had friends who were doing public health more in terms of like communicable disease, epidemiology type stuff. And because I was interested in clinical admin in Australia, I found out in the US they had a major for healthcare organization and policy under public health. So I thought, oh, wonderful. Let me go give that a go. And that's what I did. It was very fascinating because coming from Australia, knowing that system, and then trying to learn the US health system and all their Medicaid, and oh, that was a whole other ball game for me. But I did learn some very interesting skills there. And it gave me more ideas like, okay, wow, I don't need to remain a clinician and I could go this pathway. If we had stayed in US, but because of the nature of the US military, about every 3 to 4 years, they will move the service member around. So we had gotten news that we were potentially going outside of the United States. So either Alaska, which they counted outside of the US just because it's not connected to the continental USA. So Alaska, South Korea, or Germany were on the books. So I thought, all right, well, gonna get this degree. Probably can't use it if we end up in Germany or South Korea. But I was thankful that there are a lot of remote options. So I kind of kept that at the back of my mind, like, okay, if we go, this degree will still be useful, the skills will still be useful. But then at that time, also during my MPH, part of our family planning was we wanted to try for a child and we were successful. So I was like, okay, here we go. Another life-changing event. Yeah. So that was that segment of the journey, which was really challenging. Honestly, I would say not just from a personal perspective, but I would say ever since leaving Australia and not having my own income, it was constantly in the back of my mind. And the way also I was raised, I really didn't like being reliant on my husband for financial, even though we had like, yeah, he had no issues if I wanted to do anything. But the part of me still felt like, oh, I need to ask permission because it's like quote unquote technically not my money. So that was always bothering me, honestly.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing. Just wondering, what made you want to do the Masters of Public Health, and is there how long does it take? Is there much difference that you heard? I know many different universities and many different countries offer Masters of Public Health. Are they similar, or is it transferable across countries, or?
Yeah, I think in a sense, I feel like it's a bit more transferable because it's not like a clinical skill or licensing thing where you have to. I mean, it always pays to understand the local population and their needs for sure. But the concepts of public health, I feel that's universal. And because you can major in different streams depending on your interests. I took about 3 years because I did have to take a break for, postpartum recovery, and then I had really bad postpartum depression, so I could only
Mm,
manage one class per semester to finish things up. But overall, if you, I think even while working, if you can put in the time, 2 years, you could finish that. I didn't think the workload was too heavy. I found it very enjoyable, but perhaps also I'm an academic at heart. I
yeah.
love going to school. Yeah, so I decided to pursue public health with specifics to that major because in geriatrics, I was really disillusioned with how the health system worked in a sense that the hospital policy and I guess the local areas policy at that time, it didn't allow us to provide palliative care for dying elderly people in their own home, which was baffling to me because we could do that for those with cancer or other terminal illness. But I suppose because aging is not considered an illness or a disease, so there was one case, this gentleman, I will never forget him and his family because I was probably a few months actually before my contract ended and I was going to go to the States. I tried so hard to get him services that he can pass at home with his family as per his final wishes. But that kind of fell apart. There were, of course, some things in the gaps I didn't even notice, but because there was no guidelines in place, there were no active partnerships in place as well, I would say within departments. So I kind of had to figure everything out myself. At that time, I was doing a PHO role, kind of acting registrar. That was hard. So it was really heartbreaking when he ended up in the emergency department with one of his daughters, and that's where he passed. Ah, that was, and I'm like, this, I felt very powerless, even as a clinician. Um, and when I asked, heads of departments or my bosses, thankfully I had really good bosses as well who never faulted me for anything. They were like, well, you tried your best, but things just kind of fell apart. I kind of realized that even if I climb the ranks, become a consultant geriatrician and head of department and all that stuff, I was probably still going to have to abide by a lot of hospital executive set rules, which I'm probably not afraid to say now that I'm out of the system. I've noticed that a lot of hospital execs across the world, a lot of them are run like a business rather than, to me, I feel like hospitals, we should run them as a service rather than a business. So the KPI metrics that you're looking at, like, oh, bed turnover, income and hours, like I feel those reflect more if you're like a for profit, but it doesn't reflect patient care or quality, or even with us as clinicians. So I felt that if I wanted to change that, I kind of need to play the game. I need to go up there. And that's where I thought in public health plus clinical admin, that would actually empower me with a lot of knowledge and skills and the confidence to say that I know what I'm talking about. I'm translating a clinical experience to this exec level. Yeah, which is why even now in my business, I'm doing my best to head that way and get involved with things that will build me and my other partners up to bring us to that level to inform other businesses or organizations in the postpartum. And I stumbled into postpartum honestly because I still remember in all of my clinician days, I would avoid pregnant women like the plague because I never wanted the responsibility of being, like the life and death decision maker for two lives. I just couldn't handle it personally. But what happened was when I had my first child in the US, I noticed a lot of postpartum information as well as support wasn't enough. And even as a clinician, there were some things about pregnancy and postpartum I was just clueless, which was probably a small aspect in my postpartum depression to develop that because I felt I should have known better. I should have caught things earlier, shoulda, coulda, woulda, and all of that kind of culminated. So at the same time, I wanted to do the confinement practice, which a lot of Asian mothers, it's that 30 to 40 days after you give birth, you rest, you take your herbs, and you do certain wraps and massages just to let the body recover and heal from childbirth. It was very difficult to do that in rural Alabama. We had to fly to New York to see a Chinese medicine doctor to get my herbs and all of that. So that was what actually inspired me to go more into postpartum and specifically to start writing my book Postpartum 30, because I realized that all of these things are passed down word of mouth. Some of them are lost in translation. I cannot speak Mandarin much, very minimal Cantonese at best. And I realized, especially when we found out we were having a girl, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to pass this down. And I have no way of doing this. There were no YouTube channels. I mean, social media talked about people who were in the luxury confinement centers or postnatal retreats, but no one really talked about what the practice is or how can we do it in the 21st century that still respects our heritage and our elders. So I thought, I guess I'll have to write the book. So
Yeah,
that's kind
tell
of,
tell us about writing book, listening to, other podcasts and people, it sounds like writing book is very difficult and takes longer than you expect. Um how did you find the process of writing a book and publishing and promoting and yeah.
oh my gosh, when you said promoting, that brings like a drop to my heart because that the hardest part once you become an author is marketing. And to be honest, till today, I don't market my book the way I should. I actually am using my book more like a business card. And this is where I think it might be interesting to your listeners. So those who are in a position where it doesn't matter if you're entrepreneur or not, if you're setting yourself up to be an expert in your field, I think writing a book, whether on the topic or kind of like how I did was I merge. So my book's audience is directed to moms and their families and also to health professionals if they want to. But the way I wrote it is bite size because moms are busy. They probably read a chapter. And also the way I wrote it is each chapter, you don't have to like read the one before to get what's going on. And a lot of personal stories in there to really connect with the audience. And it was hard. It took me 2 years from starting the project to publishing. Took me 2 years because I don't know why I do this all the time, but I choose to do a lot of things at once. Probably my ADHD, I don't know. But I started writing the book about the time we found out I was pregnant with our second child. So I thought, yay, I'm going to publish this as soon as the child is born, 9 months each, right? Of course, I should have doubled that time. But yeah, it took 2 years. It was tough, not just because of life circumstances, but the process of writing the book, you also, and depending how you write the book, of course, I actually hired a book coach because I realized this project was really important to me and I needed the right guidance to get to where I wanted to. And it was quite transformative, to be honest. I did have to do a lot of deep digging within myself because to write the personal stories in the book and then to link that up with the recommendations of postpartum wellness, postpartum care and support, that some moments I had to pause because I'm like, okay, this is too much. I need to process what's going on. And then I would say the hardest part is getting to your first draft. And that first draft usually goes to what they call a developmental editor. So if you work with a publisher, which is what I did, more of an indie publisher, I didn't go with a big one. They do developmental editing first, which someone looks at your whole manuscript and gives you quite deep feedback on, like, you could expand this, or what does this mean? They really kind of help you flesh it out more. So my manuscript, the words doubled between the developmental edit time. And then after that, it goes through more of the line edits and all those things, which is making sure that your tone works throughout the whole manuscript, grammar, and then it starts to be the small stuff. Editing can be grueling because you go through the manuscript so many times. I feel sometimes it gets blurred and you're like, I can't read this anymore. And like, oh, you know what? Just publish it. Oh my God, I'm done with this. I did have those moments. But the fun part is when the book cover design comes in. I did really enjoy that part. That's really nice. And yeah, so I would say it's tough. I mean, because I've done a thesis before when I did stem cell research back in Malaysia, I would say that it's similar to if you write a really long and big thesis, because you really have to, go through it. You have to make sure, and depends on what you're writing. If you're writing nonfiction, it's important to fact check and cite your work as well, because I guess that's the standard, and perhaps we'll set that for ourselves, as clinician and academics. So yeah, that was an interesting journey. I do not regret it at all. I would go through the pain all over again. And I highly recommend it, that if you can publish a book, whether you yourself write it or you have a ghostwriter do it for you, self-publish or traditional publishing, whichever way you choose, it is really helpful to set you up when you tell people, hey, I'm an author as well. I believe I am where I am today because of my book.
Mm.
And because of the way I used it as well. So when I go to conferences or anything, I bring my business card and my book. And of course, I try to find the people that I feel will resonate with, and then I gift them my book as a business card.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, especially, business cards or random, online friend requests. It's probably not as deep and meaningful as, if someone takes the time to read your book, and if they resonate with it, that's probably your, intended or your target audience or your tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm just having a think here. Going back a little bit, I think some of our listeners will be curious about, working in the US. So I guess in an alternate universe, or say maybe some of your colleagues say they were moving from another country or Australia to the US and wanted to practice. So there's the USMLE, is it 1, 2, and 3? And
Yes.
then depending on the scores, get into like a specialty of choice. Is that right? Or
Yes, from what I've looked up, you definitely need your step one to at least, do go through the matching process. And then step 2 and 3 is kind of like you can do it later, but most of the kind of forums and all that I've looked at, they recommend if you really want to get in, try to do your step 1 and 2 first. I
mm,
would say it's a lot easier because it's a lot easier to do this when you're kind of fresh out of med school, because all the basic sciences are still there, and it's not your clinical experience. How do I say this? It was difficult for me to answer the questions because I'm like, this is not what we do in real practice, but you know the answer is the other thing, which is not what you do in reality. So that was hard for me to. And I know that in Malaysia, my medical university there, they also had twinning partners with American med schools, so people would take the exam step one there, and I think they did step two in this. I can't remember. It's just a while ago. But I think if you want to, yeah, go to the US as soon as you have the desire, like go and try and take the exam. But I think if you're preparing for the BPT exam, then you should be all right, because that exam, from the brief, moments I've done some of the questions, it does go back to basic sciences. But of course, I think it's a higher level than USMLE, because USMLE is meant for like after med school, you do that to match into a program, rather than, basic physician training. But at least, yeah, basic sciences is tough. So I think if you want to do it, do that first, and try to score as high as possible, as they say. And from what I've read, and because I didn't consult anybody on this, I just kind of did the exam myself as a backup plan. I did read that the first attempt pass is probably more important than if you take it a second time and you get a super high score. But I don't know. I think if, those advice are probably for people fresh out of med school. But if you're coming in as a seasoned clinician with references and all that, I actually don't know how that plays out, because I personally don't know anyone who's done that. I do know one person now who's attempting it. She is actually also from Australia, and now she's doing a master's of public health in the US and doing observerships and things to eventually get into a matching program. So she's still doing that journey. So yeah, I don't know how that will pan
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, great tips. And thanks for sharing. And then the other thing, which you talked earlier, which I wanted to highlight, yeah, I guess that's a sad story about, yeah, patient wished to die at home, but unfortunately couldn't happen. Do you think it was kind of like lack of services? I know some healthcare services have, outpatient outreach or community PAL
Mm-hmm.
care, but however, they might only visit, briefly during office hours. Um, is it kind of setting up the equipment or hospital bed or medications or training the family members to administer medications? Was it like just a whole host of factors um, that was contributing to the lack of community PAL care or?
Yeah, definitely. I also think overall, the care factor when we think about elderly patients is not there, because uh, this is where I think the way we're trained in allopathic modern medicine is you disease, you diagnose, you solve the mystery essentially. But with aging, there is no real mystery to solve. They're aging, and issues crop up, and quality of life is the primary, I guess, KPI we look for. So I've noticed throughout geriatrics, even to request certain diagnostic tests and things, I had to go to the department to like fight for my patient, because they're like, well, why do you want to do this? He or she's 80 years old, blah, 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 waste of resources. And I'm like, you did not just call my patient a waste of resources, please. And so I feel it's on that level, where most of, our elderly people, they're invisible. They're just kind of like there to exist. And I don't know, like I think until we get to that age, or we have family members who are there at that age, and you realize, wow, it's the care factor, I think, isn't as strong as it can be. And I think once that's there, other things will kick in, because then people pay more attention, which I think will happen, because overall in the entire world, everyone's living longer. Social systems are realizing, oh, our social security or pensions are kind of, not going to match that, because there's not enough young people in the workforce. There's global, fertility rate issues.
Mm,
It's very interesting, which, but all in all, I think when the culture or the policy changes, then it could. But I know that when I left Townsville Hospital, I think I talked to at the time, I don't know if he's still there, the palliative care department's boss. and he was an amazing guy. He was like, we're all sorry this happened to the patient. And I was very surprised. He sat down with me, a super junior registrar, to ask how can we do better. I was like, wow, I'm
Wow.
flattered. But I told him my opinions, and it sounded like he would be like, I think we actually need to have more partnerships with geriatrics, because palliative care has a whole center. They have the resources. Why don't we just share this with the elderly who want to pass away at home?
Mm,
So I think when that happens, then the palliative care for the elderly, I think, can improve. But I think it takes a lot of work from the clinicians ourselves first
mm.
before things get to a higher level. Yeah.
So, Crystal, let's talk about the differences in the healthcare. The countries, I guess that you've been in: Australia, USA, Germany, and France. What sort a very broad topic, but what are some kind of differences or similarities that come to mind?
Absolutely. It's been fascinating. Yeah, I actually don't think I mentioned this fully in part one. Like Australia to the US was my first, I guess, move with my husband because of his military work. And then after 3 years in the US, we moved to Germany for 3.5 years. And he retired from the army in June, and we've decided to try to make France our home. So very different places, cultures, languages, even. So I'm gonna have to, as soon as school starts for the kids in September, I'm gonna have to go to French school as well to learn the language. So what I found interesting was because we were in the military system in the US, we were under a very different type of health insurance. I noticed in the US, coming from Australia, there this obsession. I can use the word, I guess. Yeah, the obsession of what health insurance do you have? Do you have insurance? And I remember one time in Townsville, my husband was really sick because I think I brought home influenza A because there was an outbreak in awards. Quite sure he had it. And he was really ill. He refused to go to the emergency, even when I said, hey, like, I know people there. We can at least just get you hydrated because you're really ill. He refused and kept going on about insurance. And I'm like, why? Like, your health is in jeopardy. Let's just go and worry about that later. I didn't realize what that really meant till I moved to the US and became a user of the health system. And I'm like, okay, wow. The emphasis is because it's so expensive out of pocket in the US for patients. And I've noticed that as a as a patient in the US and talking to my physicians there, I always make it clear that I come from a medical background because I feel like when I seek care as a patient, if I don't let people know I have, physician background, I won't be able to get the best care for myself, because we know the questions that I asked, we know how to answer them that can elicit the different outcomes, right? So I always make it clear so that they can, point me the right way. And I've just noticed, I felt, this is a personal opinion, that they practice very like defensive medicine almost, because it's, will people sue me, can this be reimbursed under insurance, or it kind of always seems around that, rather than what I was used to like in Australia was you just make the best clinical decision and go forward. Like no insurance can company and come and tell you like you can't give this treatment or something. So that was quite jarring to me to experience in the States. And I actually had Bell's palsy, went to the emergency department because I was like freaking out. Of course, you've seen this diagnosis, but to have it yourself is a different story. And yeah, out of pocket, they did a CT scan, which some of my friends were like, why? It's a clinical diagnosis. It's not, you don't fit the bill of having a stroke. That's when I was like, oh, and the bill came up to a few thousands. And I was like, holy crap, okay, that's a lot from what I would expect in Australia. I walk in and get care without, yeah, being out of pocket that amount. But thankfully, we had the health insurance, so we could get reimbursement and didn't have to pay all that out of pocket. Yeah, so that I felt in the US was very fascinating. And when I did the my master's of public health and spoke to my instructors about this type of mindset and behavior in healthcare consumption in the US, to put it that way. And they were like, oh, no, we could do so much better in the US. So there's a lot of opinions on that. And I'm sure that, your listeners who watch the news, like with the US elections coming up now in November, all these things kind of come out in the open again and people start talking about
Mm,
universal healthcare. And yeah, so it was fascinating in the US to come from Australia to go into that setting.
mm. And just
And
to,
well,
I think I watched a video, maybe YouTube, or I'm sure if we find a good link to explain simply the US healthcare system, we can try and link it in the show notes. My understanding is, yeah, I think a lot of people, insurance is covered by the employer, is that right? And then,
yes.
the hospitals often, I think they often charge a markup on the true costs of medicines and scans and all that because they know a certain percentage might get rejected by the insurer. And in it, yeah, it is an interesting system where, yeah, sometimes, scans and medicines need approval from a non-clinician, someone in the insurance
Yes.
company. And then I think as a very, very basic safety net, is that like Medicaid or something where certain hospitals can't turn patients away? Is that
Yes.
right?
Correct. Yeah, they do have, I think, a federal law. We didn't go that in depth in this in my master's of public health just because of the classes I
Mm,
took. But they do have certain laws that hospitals cannot turn someone away because of their immigration status or the financial status. But a lot of this sometimes is up to the front desk as well. So it depends on the training the staff get. It's not really the staff's fault. It's the system. It's a
mm,
systemic issue, honestly. So yeah, people are very wary about
mm,
calling the ambulance or going, and I mean, even just from the childbirth and postpartum perspective, there is also many stories of people giving birth in a car on the way there, the Uber,
mm,
because they don't want to call an ambulance. They rather call an Uber, and it's like, good Lord, okay.
mm,
It's not really the most practical or safe way for both the Uber driver, who is a civilian and non-clinician,
mm,
and then the patients themselves. So yeah, it's very interesting in the US to even when I got my bill, you could see the difference in the bill that they built to me. And then when the insurance kind of sent out, oh, here is your explanation of benefits. And then they kind of explain the breakdown. I'm kind of like, okay, like, why is this so different? I don't
mm,
remember now, to be honest, but I remember it was a few $100 difference at least. And I was like,
mm. Yeah, I think
okay.
actually, yeah, the video, I think what they explain is the reason why they charge so high is, yeah, I think because they know a certain percentage of patients can't pay. So they're, I guess, charging more to the patients who can pay to subsidize
Yeah,
the care of patients who can't pay. So I guess, yeah, hospitals are also uh, maybe not ethically, but I guess ideally they're trying to take the patients that can pay and not see the patients that can't pay. I think was the summary of the video that I was watching. But
yeah, it's interesting because when I looked up, like, Townsville Hospital, it's a government hospital. I don't know the finances behind it. I never looked into it at the time I was working there. But when I was in the US, I just got curious and I looked up like the hospital where I went to deliver my child and everything. A lot of them say, oh, we're a non-profit or it's set up as a
mm,
non-profit entity. But it's interesting the way it's run is very business-like. It's really everything is run like a for-profit business, like health is a for-profit. And I mean,
mm,
that's why I think you can see and feel the distrust of the general American people with healthcare in general, which I would definitely attribute it to the misinformation, anti-vax, like all the things you hear about people, and this big pull towards quote unquote holistic
mm,
medicine. I personally hate that it's called that way because medicine is holistic in general. I still remember in my Malaysian med school and in the Aussie med school, you're taught to approach your patient in a holistic manner. There is no way around it. You can't just do it one way. You got to look at the whole picture. So it's fascinating to me that the term holistic is attached to like alternative medicine, quote unquote, alternative healthcare, when that's really how everybody, nurses, allied health, we all practice health and medicine holistically. because that's
Mm,
that's the best way, and to do it. But I suppose that's the US is very good at their cultural exports, I would say, since the
mm,
age of time, from MTV pop culture to now all of their health views and the social media gurus. Like it's a
mm,
big export
mm,
overseas, and I see that Australia a bit. Even in Europe, you can see some of the trends, health trends in US kind of pouring over. I mean, the United States is pretty much a leader in a lot of things. People look to them to follow trends. So it's not surprising that some
mm,
of their health views and perceptions flow over in countries like Australia and in Europe where there is universal healthcare. But I would say my experience in Germany and France, the people definitely trust the healthcare professionals more.
mm,
But there is a growing kind of doubt because there is still a very, I guess, a old culture of medicine where I'm the doctor, listen to me, I know the best, which does exist in Malaysia as well. When I was growing up, it was like a listen to me or else you're gonna, fail in your health kind of thing. So yeah, so coming from the US to Germany, so even till now we can access the military type of insurance, but as retirees it's kind of a different way. But in Germany, because we were stationed there as part of like the active duty service status, so to speak, we mostly utilize the American healthcare on base. And then when you get referred out to the German health providers, of course, that's when, thankfully for me, not so much of a culture shock because I've lived in a few countries, but for a lot of American families who maybe have never left America and come to Germany, it's quite a shock to experience the German health culture in terms of the social culture, where I would say in America they're more used to advocating for their health, like my opinions also matter. In Germany, it's more of a you do what I say, I'm the doctor. And the German communication way, even the language, it is kind of rough. And from what I've learned, unless you are, how would I say this? With many Europeans, I suppose, but in Germany, it's like if you're an acquaintance, you're an acquaintance. There's no like small talk. They don't do that. When you're friends, it's a different story. And I did have, I guess the blessing to be friends with a German person through a friend, her husband, and wonderful, like lovely, could sit for hours and talk. But on the outside, they're like, tell me what you need and thank you, and that's that.
mm.
So for the healthcare perspective, it was quite jarring for people
Yeah.
who were
Oh,
not used to that. Mm.
and what about France? Is that similar to Germany or?
France so far, France, I feel I haven't gone to see a doctor yet.
Mm,
But I've looked it up because we actually just moved here. So this is what, August right now that we're recording this. We just officially moved here like end of May. So I'm starting to at least look and see, who can I go to? How does it work? Because we're still waiting on some resident card to then get the French health system.
mm,
Um, so like Germany and France, they have their like state provided health insurance. Essentially in France, I think they cover like 70% of your care, and they require you to get 30%. I think in Australia it was like that because I did have to get like Bupa or something when I was there just to have the additional private health insurance cover. But overall, the vibe and the people in France, they're definitely more laid back than the Germans for sure. But what I found interesting is if right now, without French health insurance, if I was to just walk in and pay cash for care, I would probably be paying maybe 25 to 30 euros for a visit, which is really not expensive at all. Compared to in the US, you would be paying hundreds or worry that it might even go in the thousands because add-on fees. I know in the US they have so many add-on fees in the bill. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, so that's what they have here in France. So they have the universal. It's very similar to Australia, even Germany, because the taxes are quite high, but it pays into the social system as
mm,
well. What I've noticed in France, though, is in I guess, the local catchment area, there is an initiative to like kind of like health preventative measures as well as like quality of life improving measures that is it also has a eco-friendly component because the French are quite big on trying to move towards that. So my area has a lot of elderly folks. Serendipitus, my to come back to this kind of environment. They have, for example, like washable menstrual products and washable diapers for both children and adults in this area. That there's a grant for all the residents here that you can claim to improve, waste, reduce waste for disposables, and also to support the residents here who might have issues that they need those, and so I feel like the social system ties in with the health side of things as well, because a lot of these measures move towards trying to prevent you from getting ill or poor health, which I think is wonderful. Australia, I don't remember, at least in Townsville, having those type of measures, but that could change because that was a while back. It's been 8+ years since I've left Australia, so that could change now. Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, so yeah, the thing I would say though is with the postpartum care, at least Germany and France, not all countries in Europe though, pelvic floor rehabilitation for women after childbirth is a gold standard. So that's built into the state health insurance. So you go give birth, and then they built in like I don't know, at least 10, if not 20 visits or something, depending on the insurance. That you can go see a pelvic floor specialist to assess whether you need help, and if you do, then you get therapy or rehabilitation. That definitely doesn't exist in Australia, doesn't exist in America for sure, doesn't exist in Malaysia. I've met some people from Switzerland. That's also not a gold standard there. I don't know about other parts. In UK, it's definitely not a gold standard. I've asked my friends and midwives, people who work there. So it's interesting that it comes like to women's health. Another reason we chose France is it feels that there's a bit more support for women's health, and we have two girls, so I thought that was so important to have as they grow up. And also like abortion has been put into the constitution in France just a few months ago because they were watching the situation in the US and decided, okay, we got to make sure we enshrine certain women's health rights here in France. So yeah, I would say very interesting, healthcare systems, quite similar for those with universal healthcare. It kind of works out the same. And yeah, I think that's what I remember, at least from these three places.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for sharing that. I think it's very interesting. Obviously, I, don't know much about working in these countries, and I'm sure a lot of listeners, most of my shows are from Australia, though I have noticed a few, in the stats from North America, etc. So
Yeah, actually,
interesting to see.
I do want to add with the working here. I have a friend working in Dusseldorf in Germany. And I know of friends who have family members in France who are, clinicians. And of course, I think we're familiar with our colleagues from the NHS coming over to Australia. I had plenty of those colleagues
Mm,
in Townsville. It There is a problem with clinicians shortage in the EU for sure, especially since COVID happened. Not just physicians, but nurses as well. It's a problem. My friends are struggling. Wait times are long, and and I know like in France, I think the physician pay or ability to charge is capped at a certain amount, so that if you pay out of pocket, you don't pay too much as well. And physicians, they can choose different tiers of charging, kind of like in Australia, where you can choose the gap, or they have something like that similar here as well. But the overall like pay isn't, I guess, as good as it can be, considering the workload, responsibility,
mm,
and the time and all that. So there was, I think, the WHO a few years back, just after COVID, for the EU region, they kind of put out a little article or notice that, oh, we should and must address this because the clinician shortage is not gonna be sustainable down the road. So there is definitely an issue here. So which means that I think similarly, work conditions, pay, all comes into the factor of why people are leaving the
mm.
field.
Yeah,
Mm.
and I've on my podcast I've interviewed Dr. Ursula and also Dr. Suresh, who yeah have had experience with the NHS and yes, a lot of doctors leaving that due to pay, due to conditions to other countries
Hmm.
such as Australia. And yeah, I'm not sure the exact numbers, but in terms of pay, not accounting taxes, of course, I think
Yeah.
US tends to pay probably the top or nearest to the top, and
Yes, they
then
do.
Australia is relatively high as well, and then I think lower generally in the EU is my understanding, and I think also Malaysia maybe depends on specialties, not particularly high as well. I've heard.
If you go private, because then you can charge what you like. But if you stay public, there is an issue still. The Ministry of Health back in Malaysia, they are trying to address the issue of doctor shortage or brain drain. Go to Singapore. I think if you don't mind that work style, because Singapore, they're very productive, very high intensity type of work. Then I think taxes probably a bit better as well. And then for what you earn, you probably have a good, and the currency is strong as well, Singapore dollars. So there are people who consider, hey, Singapore might actually be an option.
Singapore, yeah. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and well, I guess shifting gears, talking about finances and investing, we've touched on the earnings. What about I guess, just living in US, Germany, France, like how are you finding the tax system? How are you finding yeah, like tax returns? I know, the Australian tax system is very complicated at times compared to other
Yeah.
countries. Yeah.
Let's just say I hire somebody to help me. No doubt about that. It's ever since I was an intern at Townsville, I've always had someone for my taxes. I know I've got my medic friends who do it themselves, but I think if you know you're poor at numbers or you just don't want to deal with the numbers, just hire an accountant.
Mm.
But definitely then use your accountant to educate you, get some financial literacy, which I'm still
Yes.
learning till this day. I think that's so important because maybe the generation we grew up in, it just was never emphasized. It's not something people thought was a life skill, which is such a life skill. Unless the entire economic system changes one day and we don't have to deal with this anymore. But we have to, and it also, if you, and I think especially for our clinical environment, you might meet people of a different nationality or dual nationalities. Then you've got double
Mm.
tax systems to navigate. You got to, like, for me, so I'm Malaysian, never gave up my citizenship. I still have my Australian PR. I'm gonna try to renew that, to be honest, because if France doesn't work out for us, then I'm gonna come back to Australia for sure.
Mm.
So I have a super, but that's kind of all I have, and I can't touch that till I'm 65, regardless of
Yeah.
my like residency status.
Yeah. Oh, I thought
And
if you left Australia, you could get the super out, isn't it? Or
I can, but then there's a tax levied upon
ah,
it.
okay.
So yes, we don't intend to come back to Australia, but if this venture in France, like I have a 4-year visa here for the
Yes.
starting a business here. So if that really doesn't work out, then I gotta go work somewhere. Then the best sense would be to come back to Australia if
Yes.
um so I have that. And then in the US, my husband and I started some like the US investment stuff. So they're like 401k, Roth IRAs.
Yes.
And we'd have life insurances as well. We started some, I can't remember what funds, but we started one for our girls that was similar to what my husband had when he was a kid. His granddad started like almost like a life insurance fund or something, where they can retrieve it once they're, I don't know, 20, 18, or whatever the age is. So we have those investments with the US. Germany, we didn't touch anything because, but while in Germany, we had to navigate German taxes with American taxes because so my whole Bridges and Health company in France, it kind of had its infancy in Germany as just a freelancer type of business. So for me to run, this is where the German laws, oh my gosh, I don't know why I did that, but I did that. the German laws can be very, as I think most people have the image of Germany being very strict and
Mm,
following rules and things like that. That is very true, especially with the tax side of things. So even though I was on a special visa to Germany, and the only people I served were American military community members, I still had to register my business in Germany as a German business and then navigate German taxes, which was important for me to hire someone in Germany to navigate that, because there was an issue in Germany where they tried to tax the soldiers' pay, which under that treaty and special visa, you're not supposed to, because they're there on a special mission,
mm.
essentially. So that was interesting, having to navigate and teach my German accountant that this is actually the case. So no, I will not reveal to you my husband's income or give you any information on him. And then in France, right now we are navigating. So I need to declare my super everywhere I go, essentially, and just say like I have it. France has a tax treaty with the US. So my husband is drawing a pension and some disability pay. We need to navigate that with France. And then in the French side, for my business, there is a lot of social charges to pay
Mm.
as soon as you have an employee. And I will be hiring myself as an employee so that I can build up some financial history here in France
Yep.
for my own benefit. So that's a lot to navigate, to be honest. Which
What's the business tax rate? Because in Australia, if you start a company and have staff working for you, I think the business small business tax rate used to be 30%. Now it's like 27.5%. I mean, it's different if you're a sole trader where you just
uh-huh.
basically responsible for all the work yourself. Is there a flat business tax rate in the US or Germany or France or?
US, I don't know. I think it also depends on how you incorporate. So, like you said, if you're a sole trader, you kind of have a different thing. If you are an LLC or whatever, that's probably a different thing. I know in Germany, I registered as a sole proprietor.
Mm,
So I pretty much, like, even the VAT, the value added tax
mm,
in
mm.
Europe, I didn't even have to deal with that until I hit a certain revenue amount.
Yes,
Then,
similar to the GST in Australia.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
registering for GST. If you're a sole trader, I think if turnover more than 75,000 a year. Yeah.
Yeah. But then if you do the German GmbH, which is kind of like the LLC type thing, then that's a whole other. But I never even ventured there. I was like, nope, not gonna even think about that. But in France, I am incorporated as a limited partnership type. I think it's called SAS, Sans
Mm,
Society. I can't even pardon me. I don't want to butcher the language. So in France, the I guess corporate taxes, so to speak, which includes the social charges that you pay. It depends on the structure that you choose. So just an example, I have the SAS. So anytime I have an employee, you pay up to 60-70% social charges
wow.
on their salary. So I have an accountant. I haven't paid myself yet. I'm kind of like, I need to figure out what's best, because as a shareholder of the business, I can pay myself dividends, which I'm told at this point is 30%
Mm,
taxes. So I just need to be smart about how I pay myself and then use dividends to bump up my income, essentially.
yeah.
And then,
And
of
I,
course, there's income tax that I'm like, okay, I need to navigate that when the time comes to.
yeah. And I guess, in the different places that you've worked, how do you go about finding, like trusted advisor? It could be a tax advisor, accountant, financial planner. Is it some word of mouth or like, yeah, how do you
Yes,
go about?
word of mouth for sure. For me, it's word of mouth. I should go to the Facebook groups like expats living in France, or like expat business owners in France, or something like that. I just look through what people are saying or engage with some of them and say, how do you like? And then I'll make the call and talk to them and see if I
Mm,
like them.
yes.
I've been quite lucky at this point. I have a business lawyer here in France who he speaks English and all that stuff, and they're used to kind of expats coming
Mm,
here to get set up, and then they've got their connections. So I go through his connections for everything because I feel like if I like his work
Mm.
and he's taking care of me and my business, then I would trust his recommendation for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my definitely go-to method is word of
Yeah.
mouth. Yeah.
And what about investing? I'm not sure how much investing you've done. Obviously sometimes life circumstances and many changes can interrupt investing plans. What's your kind of philosophy from, early medical days to now about savings rate and investing and things like that?
Gosh, start investing yesterday, please. I There was a doctor's wealth planning group or something that came to us as we were finishing up in UQ, and they were like, "Oh, your first year is free with us." Da da da. And I'm like, "Sure." I thought I would be getting a lot more financial education from them, but
Mm.
we never really started anything. Even like I don't know, $100 a month, like just to get, how do I say, like you're never going to learn about investing unless you do it, right?
Yes.
And we never really started like, oh, maybe wait. So I just did my own savings because my plans was to travel and
Mm, mm.
treat my parents or treat myself. So all I did in my first couple of years, because there was nothing going on in the actual, like, I guess, larger investing side of things, I was a bit, I guess, crazy because I like, oh, save 50% of each paycheck
Oh,
and then
wow.
like live like
Congratulations.
a, yeah, live like, I did my best to do that. So renting places, like still have housemates until I decided, oh my God, I need to live for myself.
Yes.
Even the car I got secondhand, paid in cash,
Yes.
$3,000. I remember, served me well. Took me
Yeah.
from Townsville to Mount Isa and back a couple of times. So
Wow.
good,
Yeah.
good on the car. Um, yeah, and I would still kind of live like a med student almost
Yeah. I
because
think
I
I think that's
really want.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
good advice. Living below your means, a lot of doctors unfortunately succumb to
Yes.
lifestyle creep, as income goes up, and the holidays, the car, the restaurants,
Yeah.
goes up and then I guess you don't have that ability then to save and invest. And obviously I think my philosophy is, with the high inflation and
Yes.
you kind of have to this is the financial system and you just have to try and make do. And there's always inherent belief that doctors are super wealthy, but that's not necessarily the case,
Correct.
and one of the reasons why I started this podcast is a lot of doctors, yeah, we're not taught this in medical school. Money's a taboo subject. And unfortunately, yeah, I've seen a lot of my colleagues make poor financial decisions or choose the wrong advisors. And yeah, I think I just want to improve the financial literacy. I think, yes, definitely have your advisors. You don't, you can outsource the execution, but you shouldn't outsource the understanding. If you have a question, why
Yes.
were you doing this? Like, does that sound right? Do your own due diligence and fact checking and yeah, I think what you said earlier, ask questions and get them to explain things to you in simple terms as well.
Yeah, I think always ask. And if they try to brush you off, then to me, that's a red flag. Like if they don't take the time, like I've been lucky. The reason we started all the investments on the US side was, again, we took advantage. I think also try to take advantage of your situation as a doctor or whatever, I don't know, memberships you've got, take advantage where possible. So what we did was, because as active duty military, family, we had certain perks with certain financial institutions. So one of them, I actually met the financial advisor guy at like a little conference thing they had for military spouses. And I thought, I love his approach, no nonsense. And he's always like, you don't understand, ask me. I will sit down and explain to you until I make sure like you get it. So made a booking with him and we found out, oh, while active duty, they don't charge us any broker fees. And he was like, get set up now so that when you retire, we just roll you over and you still get the perks in the beginning. So we're like, take advantage of that stuff. And yeah, I take advantage of all my advisors and lawyers and accountants. I just ask and ask. I don't care how annoying I sound. And I tell them straight up, I have poor financial literacy. I don't know these things. I need you to explain to me so that together we can make the best decision.
Mm.
So I think,
I'm
yeah,
mindful of time. So I guess with the investing, it sounds like mostly is it the 401k Roth IRA? Is it mainly
yes.
shares? Is that right? Or managed funds or?
Yes. They manage our portfolio. This is where
Okay,
my
yeah, all good.
ignorance comes in. Yeah, yeah. Which no, it's important to say and admit, because even with the super, at one point they started taking my funds out to put in other things. I just
Yes.
happened to go in the portal, and I'm like, wait, no, that was not what I wanted. And
Mm.
I had to write them and be like, no, take that off and give me back
Oh, it
my
might be the
money.
insurances. Is that right? Insurances?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
maybe. Yeah.
It just popped up. And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
no, give me back. So they did give me back my money. And I said,
Yeah.
no, that's not. So yeah, check your super as well. Just always go in to check. Like, you really have to take some time. It can be quite
Yeah.
tiring and annoying, to be
Mm.
honest. But, this is your money.
What
It's
about
important.
other asset classes like property, crypto?
Yeah, no, crypto is not something I am brave enough. I tried reading about it and I'm like, oh no, maybe that's a bit too high end for me at this point. I know that so assets, we had a house in Alabama, my husband did, and then we joint ownership, but then we sold it because we had no intentions of going back to the
Mm.
States.
Mm.
I would say avoid timeshares. For
Okay.
sure, like the US
Yeah.
is popular with that. We
Yes.
did a lot of traveling at the time, so that made sense to us, but then with COVID kind of ruined
Mm.
everything, so we're like, oh well, okay, so we're still trying to get rid of that and try to get some money back. So we're working on that part to try and at least get some of our timeshare monies back. But what I'm looking at right now is actually trying to leverage my business to do investment in Europe, wherever that is. Just because some opportunities have come up where with some of my business partners that I'm actually doing like consulting for, if and when the projects go well and they want to spin off into a US LLC or whatever in Europe, a German GmbH, I want to use my business as that entity rather than me as an individual, because the tax differences. And I'm starting to realize I think that's how some wealthy people do it, is through a business entity. So it might be worth exploring if you have the interest and the time. What difference would it make if I invested as an individual, or even if I in the Australia you started a small company just as a means to, and you are the main shareholder, of course you don't always need partners or other stakeholders. That could be an avenue to explore, and I'm quite sure what I'm saying is legal because it's all within.
Yes, everyone seek your own financial tax advice, legal advice within your
Yeah.
jurisdictions.
Yes.
Disclaimer. So look, we've got a minute left. I think you've been an awesome guest. Any final words of advice for our listeners, our medical students, junior doctors regarding career, entrepreneurship, and then finally, how can listeners connect with you?
Absolutely. So I would say if you want to give it a shot, do it. Definitely have a financial cushion as well. Don't try to do things outside of your means. And I would say for, the ladies, the women, when the life change happens or you choose to step away from your career, always just think about what your financial security and situation is like. Not to say that you don't trust your partner, but you just have to know these things yourself, because life happens. Your partners could get ill, accidents happen.
So, Crystal, tell me about when, kind of going through the family planning and when you were stepping away from being a doctor and having kids. How did you and your partner navigate finances and I don't know if you did any budgeting or planning and yeah, can you share us any insights of how that went?
Absolutely. I think the best thing we did was before getting married or before deciding that we were going to do this together was having the money talk. That was actually something my parents never really taught me. Money has always been like a conflicting issue in my family. And like you said, it's very taboo in all cultures as well. And I feel even more so as, a female, a woman, growing up as a girl. It was ironic that my mom, emphasized to me that you can do it, you can create your own career, but there was no talk about money besides saying make sure you have your own bank account, separate to a joint account that you have with your spouse or your partner. And I think that goes both ways, male, females, like everybody should have their own personal account. And yeah, so I was never taught about how to talk about money, but kind of stumbled through it with my husband at the time. And we were very open about debts that we had, and any other, maybe financial habits that we have, tried to be as honest as possible. One thing we also did was did a joint account once we got married, so that everything like rent, anything that was like, used by everyone would come out of that account, but we would still have our own account. The only problem for me was I did have a nice saving, of course, first leaving Australia. So that was okay in my personal accounts. But as soon as that kind of dried out and I wasn't working because I chose not to work, going back to, school and then having our children, that started to feel just not great for me, having to then rely on the joint accounts for my own personal, things that I want to buy just for myself, or trips and things I want to get. Um, so it's really important to have the conversation as well. And I think both parties need to not guilt each other, because you're functioning now as a family unit where, yes, we have our own personal things we want to get. I think it's important to have a discussion that if it's a big purchase. So that personal
Mm,
account, I think, is so important. So when you have your own savings, you can do whatever you want with your own money then, but that the joint account for the family remains as is. And if we want to tap into that, we have to discuss, which was what we did to get me into the book coaching program. And then for even to get the visa to come to France, we needed our own capital to basically put to the business. So big discussions we had to say if this was what we want to do, then so that's why I worked very hard to try and secure consulting. And that's kind of why I ended up in consulting, because you can get bigger lumps of revenue rather than one-on-one coaching. So once I build up a consulting retainer with some partners and clients, then I know that financially be safe enough for me to pay myself something and
mm,
all that. Then I can go back to focusing on the one-on-one, moms and dads and
mm.
families. So I think that's important. And again, if you don't know what to do, just talk to someone, because there's so many ways of approaching wealth, I would say, rather than being rich. I mean, the reason I think about wealth is separate from being like rich is because there is this lady I met. Her name is Denise Doe. She is American, and she runs a wealth company to teach people, in her words, wealth literacy, not so much financial literacy, because she's all about, how do we get you to be wealthy in your assets, in, financially, and everything else. So I just quite like her approach, where she talked about leveraging not just all the US, 401ks and pensions and stuff. She emphasized the importance of also having, I guess, assets and investments that are not linked to government, just in case anything happens economically, then you kind of still have something. So she mentioned life insurances. I'm still having to learn about that, but do you know do you give advice or talk about life insurances as an investment?
Yeah, I haven't heard too much about. Yeah, I think in America and Australia it's a bit different in terms of
Mm-hmm.
insurances. I think, yeah, I mean, this is probably just social media, just seeing some people in America talk about investing the money in their life insurance or something like that. But yeah, I probably personally probably not the best person
Yeah,
to
no,
ask about
fair
that. But
enough. Yeah,
yeah.
because I mean, we were advised for our stuff that we had with the military financial investment people. We did have life insurance, but I guess they didn't tell us much about it as a, how would I put it? It was more like, oh, in case anything happens to you, then you have that, but not actually as an investment thing. So that's interesting. And I know that's where in Europe, I'm so keen to learn more, just because they're, if we do stay here long term, then I'm sure my husband and the girls will probably take up dual citizenship because they can. Then that kind of opens up a whole other ball game, a whole other ball game. But what's interesting for me is I am not entitled to the French pension, because I would have needed to work almost 42 years total
Oh wow.
consecutively to be able to be eligible, which actually, doesn't just adversely impact me, but it also adversely impacts French women or French residents who, for many reasons, choose or can't work, they don't have access to that. I was kind of shocked to learn that,
Mm.
which is why, you know, I'm glad.
Consecutive years. Is that?
I think so. I think
Yeah.
so. Or at least collect. I know in Germany it was collectively over your lifetime you need to work. That's what one of my friends
Mm.
told me. But I think I could be wrong, to be honest, because I had to translate certain things from French to English with the Google, so it could be you know. But I know that there's a certain amount of years you have to work, and I was never aware of this kind of rule. I'm not sure if Australia has it. I don't know if Malaysia has it. I just assume that once you enter the workforce, even if you're in and out and you pay taxes, then you know you are, you know, again, that could be my, I guess,
Mm.
financial literacy, you know, the poor literacy in that sense. So that kind of got me worried. And that's why I was glad when you said, oh, we should do this, because I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, like just to bring this up with other women and even for myself to hear me tell you about these things will make me think more like, oh wow, I should really, you know, get onto that and figure something out for myself. My husband has his like pension and all set. I have nothing. I mean, we have things set up where if anything happens to me, him, it could come to me, but
Yes.
it just doesn't feel secure enough. So and you know, worst case, if yeah, then with the kids, I need to make sure that I have something to fall back on if worst case scenario happens. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, and thanks for sharing that. I think lots of people feel, a sense of financial insecurity, especially in this day and age, the high inflation and yeah, I think it's interesting across many countries with aging population, kind of less people
Mm-hmm.
in the working force as you touched on earlier. It'd be interesting just just from the government point of view, how they can make it work in terms of sustaining, pensions. And I mean, yeah, I think also reading a book a while ago, life expectancy, in the past, I think even in America, the pension was kind of like a last resort, in the past. I think in America, they
Mm-hmm.
said the
Yeah.
employers, you serve, 40 years or whatever with the company, GM Motors or whatever, and then, they reward you with a pension, mm, let's say for 5, 10 years, and then you pass away. And then if you manage to live past that, maybe for, 1 or 2 years, you'd have the government kick in, at the time they set the retirement age, or
Mm-hmm.
pension age 60 or 65. But then, people were dying around that age, whereas now, people are living till 80, 85, and then it's, yeah, you can imagine very hard for the governments to fund
Oh
all
yeah.
these pensions. And so I think this is not even from my words, but some of the financial podcasts, property podcasts that I've listened to in the past. They talk about the idea of trying to take your own financial literacy into your own hands. Because the
Mm-hmm.
government may change the rules in the future, and it's probably likely, especially given the aging population. So then kind of
Yes.
just have to, yeah, the idea of independence and self-sufficiency as much as possible, if you can. I think that's why I try and advocate for the younger doctors out there to, when there's a time to take the time. I know you're busy looking after patients, working overtime, raising families, but just try to take some time to um, yeah, I think look after your physical, your mental, and also your financial health as well. And have these assets turn turn your earned income in towards passive income, towards assets.
Oh,
Obviously, in
so
Australia,
yeah.
I'm favored residential property, but whatever, shares, etc. And then kind of over the long term, that can kind of be your retirement plan, rather than relying on the spouse or the government or things like that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that is so true. Because even going back to my geriatric days, to see the poverty among the patients, especially the female patients who have outlived their spouses,
Mm.
I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's just jarring because I could see this in my, you know, the women in my family, myself. It was kind of like, yeah, so I would say a lot of things I'm doing now, like once you become a parent as well, like everything
Yes.
changes. It's quite an interesting thing for me. A lot of things I said I would never do before I became a parent, I'm doing it now.
Yeah.
And I allow myself the grace to be like, yeah, I was definitely a different person back then, different person
Yes.
now, probably will be, I don't know, when my life stage, the next phase of my life as a woman, menopause, things change. And when the kids grow up, things change. Like, it's so important to have just, yeah, to allow yourself and everything else to change along with that. And you're right, like financial well-being is core of our health and wellness, because you don't have that, you can't access things to improve and maintain your health and wellness. So I think, again, that's not taught much in wellness, which is why when I, say myself, I'm trying to do more work to define what is postpartum wellness as a field, as
Mm.
as a concept. I'm trying to come up with a framework. I have it, I just haven't put a name to it, but like the home in which I include finances is something that I always talk about. So the past couple of years, a lot of my postpartum work, I volunteer with the military community just because it was the easiest thing for me to do. And we always talk about money. And the great thing about, again, being in that military community, and I kind of wish we had more of this for doctors, because the environment is very similar in the workspace. There is like the military program called Army Community Services, and they have financial readiness, they call it. I love the word readiness because it sounds like, yes, I'm going to prepare. And I think emergency medicine probably uses very similar words. Readiness and preparedness, essentially. They have those resources that soldiers and spouses or anyone with a military ID card could walk in and say, I want help with budgeting. And they do classes, they
Mm.
give advice, and then they have resources that then you can look for people then to see what you can do with your money. And I spread that word, like I just give it out to anyone. I was like, if you're having a new baby, go talk about money to someone. You need to, you must, because kids are so expensive,
Yeah.
so expensive. And I do kind of wish there was more of this for, our medical providers, nurses, anyone involved in the medical system as the frontliners as well, because I would say my experience, especially volunteering with my husband's unit, they have this thing called the SFRG, is a Soldier and Family Readiness Group. So what it is, it's run by volunteers mostly. They could be soldier volunteers or the family members of that unit, and it's led by the commander of that unit. But what it does is it advocates for the unit's well-being, for families, single soldiers, everything. And I kind of wish we had that for doctors, because that group was really great during COVID. And when the Ukraine Russia conflict happened, we were in Germany at the time, my husband's unit, they just had to deploy suddenly, which was really hard because a lot of us uh, did not experience the whole 9/11 thing. And for many people, that was the first like actual like, oh shit, this conflict could become something type of deployment, which was a huge hit on a lot of mental health for the soldiers and
Mm.
spouses. But that group was really great in so many ways, in support, resource reaching out. And I kind of, looking back, wish during COVID that the medical community had that, because I
Mm.
would can only imagine my friends who were quarantined, or there was, like, what do we do to go home? What did the family members do during this time? Like, what if something happens? Like, there was no real, I guess, cushion or safety
Yes.
net in that sense. So that's fascinating to me to see the similarities and how, but yeah, in terms of the money part, I think it's so similar because the soldiers don't get much financial education. So it's so important to have these resources to start talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think,
I think having
mhm,
that community and support, I think yeah, it's very important. And I guess I um based in Sydney, and try to organize some meetups every now and then for doctors, just have a general chat and about how things are going. Um just touching on obviously I think planning kids, is, you can try as much as you plan and can try and budget, but
mhm.
it's very hard to know exactly, like, did you have any framework with your first kid or your second kid in terms of um having time off? I know in Australia, one of the, there was a recent article about the declining birth rate, and about one of the big
Mhm.
barriers is to service a mortgage, you kind of need two people to work, and but then
Yes.
childcare is very hard to access and very expensive, like I think 100 to $150 a day, depending on your income level and how much government assistance you get. Like, did you have any rough idea or kind of looking back rules of thumb of how much, you know, kids would cost per year or anything like that? Or
Oh, no, because I think um, I would say throughout, even till now, sometimes I still live way below my means because there's always a concern that health-wise something could happen.
mm,
This stemmed from my brother, who's 7 years younger than me. He was born with Down syndrome. And in Malaysia at the time, there wasn't much help. So a lot of interventions and things that my parents had to try and do were out of their own pocket.
mm,
And thankfully he didn't, he didn't have like hole in the heart or any other like major health issues that come sometimes with Down syndrome, the trisomies. But being around his friends who did, I was like, wow, you can never tell sometimes. You could
yeah,
have the healthiest
mm,
pregnancy, you're doing all the right things, but something happens. It's hard that way. So I would say that, when you're thinking of having kids, like, I think just living below your means and putting away a savings and starting the investment early so that if anything happens, touch wood, you
mm,
can, tap into
having a
that.
buffer, yeah,
Yeah, having definitely a good health insurance. So the good thing was I knew how much the military health insurance would cover us if anything would have happened with our kids. So that's why we weren't as concerned, because health wise we knew, okay, the TRICARE, they're called, the US military health insurance, and TRICARE will handle it. And then even right now with my husband, because he's done 23 years of service, so full pension. And unfortunately, so to speak, he's got 100% disability. So we have that cushion from his side, but also that means as a disabled veteran, his dependents also get some healthcare perks. So we're very blessed that way, to be honest, to have that cushion. Others may not, and something you might have to set up yourself to have that buffer. So I think that's where leveraging all these different products, so to speak, out there to give, and you can really get creative because and this is where I think entrepreneurship can also be your creative avenue, like you said, that side hustle or that passive income. It takes time to build,
mm,
but if that jives with your personality or your, I don't know, like I blame my ADHD all the time for the shiny object syndrome, or I just need to do a few projects at once, otherwise I just cannot sit still. If that jives with you, then give it a try. You might stumble upon something that you like, that works for you. And then it doesn't matter when you get old or something happens, the government side collapses, touch with whatever, you still have something else coming that you can rely, that is, that you've built.
mm,
So, and that takes time. So if you start this as, on the side, even with your full-time job, you can slowly nurture it. Like, there is no, one thing I've learned is there's no, as much as there are methods to do entrepreneurship and the startup world, uh, I would say as a woman stepping into that world, a lot of the systems, and I would confidently say financial systems, are set up by childless men in the past to benefit childless men. So fathers, even my husband and other of my friends I've talked to who are dads, they're actually finding that it's not easy, even as a man in this environment, to set things up because the system is not geared towards families. It's just
mm,
not. And until that changes, and I don't know when, you kind of really have to do a lot more work and take things into your own hands to get creative with
yeah,
figuring things out. And I do remember in a group before that some of the female doctors were saying that in Australia, the different states, there is also a cap into like the maternity leave payments or something.
mm.
It also
Parental leave, yeah,
depends,
yeah,
parental leave. And if you, as the birthing parent, the mother, is earning a certain amount to the extent that your combined household income meets a
mm,
certain thing, then you don't qualify for certain
yes, yeah,
benefits.
there's criteria, yeah,
Despite your spouse earning a lot less, but you're out of work. So that's that discrepancy as well. And a lot
mm,
of them, like, then why do I want to what's the point? So it similar to the US, Europe has some pretty good maternal job protection things, as well as things like, I think in Germany, a fellow Malaysian lady, she said, oh, you get 3 years, up to 3 years, you can slowly go back to work. They cannot fire you, of course. They cannot even do things like reduce your income and stuff, but you get like I think 80% and then it drops as you depend to take. And of course, I think Sweden has like the best parental leave thing, and it's shared between the moms and dads. Yeah, so it's all. I feel like if people or nations really want to tackle birth rates, it's not just throwing money at the problem. You really have to swap all your social systems to actually make sense for families. And when I say families, I don't just mean like oh with kids, because some of us may not have kids, but we have dependent family members,
Mm,
especially our elderly parents. You end up becoming the caregiver. That's hard. It's so hard. I have seen so many of my, patients, their adult children just burn out.
mm,
And that's how they end up in our wards, because they burn out. There's no respite, there's no social catch.
mm,
They just are at their wits' end, and they bring their,
mm.
elderly parents to ED. And
Yeah.
we have to admit, for the safety of the adult child and for the elderly person,
Mm.
which then eats into the health system. The whole cycle goes. So it's going to take a lot of change, a lot of, I don't know, brainstorming different ways to approach this. Like I even feel like the solution to this just isn't there yet. Like we have to create new systems to work,
Mm.
but how we're going to do that, I really don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Yeah, the whole
And
cycle.
finishing up, so with the entrepreneurship, yeah, it was interesting. You're talking about how kind of initially kind of the one-on-one clients, but then I guess maybe there might be a drop-off rate, or I guess what you were saying is having that kind of recurring revenue, isn't it, from that kind of
Yes.
consulting with some bigger clients, maybe paying you like a monthly fee or something. Yeah, that's interesting. Like, how was that, just by trial and error, or you had a business coach? And how do you I guess maybe this comes into also, charging what you're worth and confidence as well. Like, how do you, set fees and things like that?
Oh, yeah. So I had always planned to get to this point from the get-go, because when you understand how that other side of that entrepreneurship world works, that really is where the money is. Then people always aim for that. Even like, when you're a business, you aim to get like that bigger client who can give you that monthly retainer or whatever. So the great thing for my position is I'm this whole field, like I said, doesn't really exist, so to speak. So I can define it. And what I'm doing, which started in my book, which now I'm actually expanding to like a virtual platform and consulting for people. Like I had a client in the States, they started a postnatal retreat, because that's all the rage now, postnatal retreats, trying to mimic the confinement center models from East Asia. I consulted for them because that nobody's, and how I met her actually was through LinkedIn, through my book's press release. So this book, sales wise on Amazon and all that, I'm not getting much,
Yep.
but the returns in other
Yes.
ways is huge, because
Opening up doors. Yeah.
I'm leveraging the book in other ways, and nobody's doing what I'm doing. From a physician, I bring the science, I bring personal, like nobody's doing this. So I'm really trying to leverage this position I have, which is why the consulting makes sense for me to just go head on and tackle that part first, rather than with the moms. Because when I build up all these things, eventually it will reach the
Mm,
mothers and fathers on a bigger scale than one-on-one. The time as well,
mm,
the,
mm.
how do I say, I do love one-on-ones, but I can only do so many at a time.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then I can't grow the business as well.
Scaling. Yeah.
Yeah, the scaling part. So with the approach I'm doing now, I can still do it by myself mostly. I don't need to take on like 10 big clients. I just need a few. And I do also pick the type of clients and partners and make sure it aligns with all the philosophies I have. And, down the road, the more partnerships with the same people could form into something bigger. Again, in a field where there's so much change and no one's kind of stepping in to be an authority. So if you find yourself in that position and you can leverage that, that'll be, I think a good thing. And there is definitely, just from my foray again into the startup world, there's a lot of demand for physicians in these consulting roles, or even to function as a business strategist, because you bring that clinical side, you understand the patients and the health professionals as well. You can kind of flip that around and translate that. I think translational skills is important, like
Mm,
learning, yeah, how can I translate my medical background, the way you've worked, the way you handle ward rounds, the way you handle, met calls, all those things can be translated into the business world for sure,
mm, mm,
100%. But how I got here, I don't really have a conventional business coach. So I had my book coach, which I stuck with them now through like a weekly mastermind group because they don't just talk about what it's like to be an author. It's like, well, how can you use your book? So we talk about everything marketing, like, hey, you can spin this off into a coaching, consulting, da, da, da. So I just bring my things into like the hot seat, or they call it a love seat. Any issues that you encounter along the way, and the group, we brainstorm together. Plus, they have connections to other authors who may have done creative spin-offs from their book into an unconventional career. And I had a speaking coach as well, just not so much to work on my speaking per se, but to understand how, as an author and then the physician background, I can merge that to make a speaking career and use that as another revenue stream.
mm, mm,
Yeah, because what I've learned from her is, we love to go to conferences, but we always pay for it, or the hospital pays for it. But now that I'm solo, like, how can I go for these, market my book, put myself out there, and get paid doing that at the
mm,
same time?
mm,
That's actually quite challenging. It's not, you really have to hustle and pitch and all the behind the scenes. But I enjoy that though. I enjoy all these processes because I feel I'm learning so much. Um, but if you don't enjoy it, like, don't force yourself to do it. I feel
mm,
like in the business and entrepreneurship side, there's always something that fits your
mm,
personality. So if you're more introverted, or oh, it's not your style to write a book or something, like, there's always other ways to do it. You don't
mm,
have to do what other people are doing. And I've noticed, definitely for women, again, this world is made for men. So for you to thrive, sometimes you really have to be either louder or different and just put up with a lot of naysayers and, I don't know, things. So it's really important to find a community of women. I appreciate that about LinkedIn. I'm really active there. So that's one way. Then listeners can find me on LinkedIn. You just Google Kristal Lau, and I'll provide the link as well to my LinkedIn. I connected with a lot of women entrepreneurs and founders and things, and just having them to see what they're doing and how they're navigating challenges is good enough motivation, or giving me ideas on how to navigate on my side.
yeah, and that brings us yeah, to the last point, which is, yeah, like, what any kind of words of wisdom or tips for doctors, yeah, especially female listeners as well, in terms of if they want to pursue a passion project or entrepreneurship, and then also, yeah, finally, how can people find out more about you?
Absolutely. Probably two kind of nuggets is, there's never a right time to do these things. Seriously. If you want to do it, you just need to be realistic, take stock of your resources, which includes your time, your energy, and your finances. And then if you have a spouse or partner, talk to them and involve them in the process so that you can support each other through the time. Like, my husband has been a huge supporter, even though he had to leave often at the time when I was writing my book and getting things going. Like right now, he's actually, doing his father duties and giving me my space in my office, since I work from home and have everything set up here. It's important to take stock of your resources, which includes support. But yeah, no good time. If you want to do it, then just give it a shot. And even, I wouldn't say fail, even if it doesn't work out the way you want, it could just mean that wasn't kind of the pathway. You can always pivot and do, like, it happened to me many times. I even took postpartum doula training because I thought, oh, what is this? Let me find out how to do. And I realized that's not the pathway for me. And I had to create something for myself, which is, then I kind of pivoted. And I would say, this is mostly for everyone else who wants to give entrepreneurship or do something different, is do it first and get scared later. I find that works well for me because you just jump into it, you do it. A lot of times, like, I apply for things and I just go for it. And then, the good news comes, oh, you're accepted, or da da da. And then I'm like, oh, great. Oh, crap. Okay, I really got to do this now. And then I get scared, but it's too late to back up because you're booked or you're scheduled in there. And then, yeah, to me, that gets exciting. It's like, all right, I got to do it. There's no turning back now. And then I feel like when you get into that kind of mindset, then there's only the way forward from there.
Yeah, awesome. And how can people find out more about you or best way to connect with you?
Oh yes, please on LinkedIn. So that'll be linkedin.com/in/KLYQL. It's a bit of a mouth twister there, but that's my full name. So Kristal Lau. If you search me out, I should be on there. And my website, www.bridgesinhealth.com. And also I'm on YouTube. So, youtube.com/ at Dr. Kristal Lau. I will have to admit my YouTube is kind of slow. It kind of gets alive depending on my time. So hopefully I'll revive that as well. But mostly I do things on the YouTube, mostly to postpartum wellness. But under the guide of my video editor, video branding person, she suggested I make it just a Dr. Kristal Lau YouTube and have different shows, so to speak. So yeah, I'm just doing some things on there, but those are the three main places you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Crystal, for coming onto the show and sharing your very unique journey and experiences in working in healthcare, working in your the postpartum wellness coaching, your book, and many more things to come. And excited to see what's in future for you. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of listeners will have gotten great value from our chat.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel.
No worries. So thanks to our listeners for listening to the show. Please share it with someone that you find useful. If you would like to be a guest, message me as well. And until next time.